The customer is always right, unless the customer is suffering from a massive, completely embarrassing breakdown of basic logic. Today, we are exposing the absolute wildest, most pathetic items people actually had the sheer audacity to return. Warning: the level of entitlement and sheer biological ignorance you are about to hear might actually lower your own credit score. 1. This first one is genuinely concerning on a psychological level. A thoroughly spooked customer marched into a store to return a foam mannequin head that was meant for styling wigs. His complaint? He claimed its painted eyes were following him around the room. The guy actually kept this thing on his bedroom dresser and woke up in a cold sweat, absolutely convinced the plastic styling tool was actively plotting his demise. He slammed the head face down on the return counter because he absolutely refused to make eye contact with it. Listen, if a featureless chunk of styrofoam is mentally dominating you in your own home, the customer service desk is not equipped to handle your problems. You need an exorcist or a therapist, not a $20 refund. 2. A disgruntled gambler actually marched right up to a grocery store customer service desk holding a half-eaten box of Lucky Charms. He slammed the cardboard box down and aggressively demanded a full refund based on false advertising. Why? Because he had eaten a bowl that morning, bought a scratch-off lottery ticket, and lost. He was dead serious when he explained that the dehydrated marshmallows completely failed to provide the metaphysical good fortune promised by a cartoon leprechaun on television. He genuinely believed he was purchasing a magical financial advantage in the cereal aisle. That is simply not how breakfast works, buddy. If oats and sugar could manipulate the universe, we would all be eating them out of solid gold bowls. 3. Apparently, spectacular success is now a perfectly valid reason to demand your money back. A furious man stomped into a pharmacy to return an almost empty bottle of over-the-counter sleeping pills. His grievance was that they worked entirely too well, causing him to sleep right through his morning alarm and miss work. He actually wanted financial compensation for being well-rested. Sir, you willingly swallowed a chemical sedative designed to knock you unconscious, not a gentle suggestion to maybe take a light nap. You cannot penalize the manufacturer because your alarm clock lacks the decibel level of a jet engine. Take the win, enjoy the deep sleep, and maybe set a secondary alarm next time. 4. You probably know that Smart Water is just a clever brand name for premium hydration. But one college student took that label as a legally binding academic contract. He stormed into a campus convenience store, holding a failing calculus exam in his left hand and an empty plastic bottle in his right. He felt genuinely defrauded because he chugged all the electrolytes right before his midterm and somehow still had absolutely no idea how to integrate a complex function. Buddy, the beverage is designed to hydrate your physical brain tissue. It does not magically download a mathematics degree directly into your frontal lobe. If you want to pass calculus, try opening a textbook instead of a beverage. 5. This next return feels less like a retail transaction and more like a heartbreaking therapy session. A woman approached the counter to return an empty photo album, and she had actual tears streaming down her face. Her complaint had absolutely nothing to do with the binding, the price, or the plastic sleeves. She returned it because she realized she simply did not have any happy memories to put inside of it. She apparently bought the album hoping it would magically motivate her to live a better life, but staring at the blank pages just sent her into a depressive spiral. She literally returned a stationery product because her own reality was too bleak to document. That is profoundly sad and way above minimum wage pay grade. 6. Imagine being so lonely and confused that you start a one-sided beef with cable television. A visibly agitated older gentleman hauled a massive 60-inch smart TV back to the electronics department with a very specific, bizarre complaint. He was furious because the national news anchors on the screen flat out refused to answer his direct questions. He had spent 3 consecutive days sitting in his recliner, shouting political inquiries at the broadcast, fully expecting a polite two-way conversation. He eventually decided the built-in microphone must be defective. He was incredibly disappointed to discover that evening television is a one-way broadcast, not a private Zoom call with national reporters. 7. Right after New Year's Day, a wildly confident man walked into a stationery store to return a calendar from the previous year. His rock-solid reasoning for the return was simply that the product had abruptly stopped working. He was incredibly offended that the pages had completely run out of dates and aggressively argued that a premium quality paper product should definitely last longer than a measly 12 months. He basically wanted the store to honor a lifetime warranty on the relentless forward march of time itself. The cashier had to politely explain how the Gregorian calendar has functioned for centuries, while this guy stood there feeling like the victim of a massive corporate scam. 8. Basic dental hygiene and common sense took a massive backseat when an angry woman tried to return a decorative bowl of artificial fruit. She aggressively slammed a shiny plastic apple down on the counter, and it featured a massive, deep bite mark right out of the side. She started screaming that the grocery store was selling poisoned produce because her snack tasted exactly like cheap candles instead of a crisp gala apple. She felt personally attacked that the home decor aisle was not stocking fresh, nutritious snacks. Ma'am, the item is entirely constructed out of colored wax and toxic paint, not nature. It is a miracle you did not shatter all your front teeth trying to eat a centerpiece. 9. The sheer audacity of some consumers will leave you speechless. A guy hauled an empty metal propane tank into a hardware store, complaining that the gas ran out way too fast. Upon further questioning, he casually admitted that he left his backyard barbecue grill blasting on maximum heat for 6 straight hours during a party, just to keep his concrete patio feeling cozy like a campfire. When the tank inevitably emptied out, he acted completely betrayed by the laws of thermodynamics and demanded store credit for selling him defective gas. Sir, you do not get a financial refund for intentionally burning up all your fuel just because you are too cheap to buy a patio heater. 10. Forget about broken electronics. This particular guy actually tried to return physical fitness. A middle-aged man walked into a sporting goods store holding a pair of heavily worn, completely muddy running shoes. He slammed them on the counter and demanded his money back because he had owned the sneakers for a full month and hadn't lost a single pound of body weight. The clerk asked about his workout routine, and the guy casually admitted he just wore them to the couch to watch football, fully expecting the aerodynamic design to burn calories passively. Buddy, it is footwear, not a magical liposuction device strapped to your ankles. 11. Relationship counseling comes in many strange forms, but this one takes the cake. A guy tried to return a cheap plastic novelty party hat labeled as a mind reader. His complaint was that the hat completely failed to reveal what his angry girlfriend was actually thinking about him. He apparently wore the ridiculous prop during a heated domestic argument, stared at her like a hardened detective, and waited for the magic headgear to activate and beam her thoughts into his skull. When absolutely nothing happened, he accused the party supply store of blatant false advertising. Buddy, if you desperately need to know what your partner is thinking, you should probably try listening to her instead of relying on a gag gift. 12. A self-proclaimed survivalist confidently marched into a camping store to return a premium solar-powered flashlight, claiming it was completely useless in an emergency. He confidently explained his foolproof survival strategy, which involved keeping the device locked away in a pitch-black basement drawer for months. Naturally, when a storm hit and the power grid failed, the flashlight was completely dead. He was red in the face, furious that a piece of technology powered exclusively by the sun actually needed to be exposed to sunlight in order to charge its battery. That is some serious vampire logic right there. You cannot starve a solar panel of light for half a year and then blame the manufacturer for the darkness. 13. A frustrated homeowner marched into an electronics store to return a premium robotic vacuum cleaner, claiming the expensive machine absolutely hated her family. She wasn't complaining about the suction power or the battery life. She passionately argued that every time someone opened the front door, the tiny plastic disc immediately made a desperate, high-speed dash for the street. She genuinely felt the appliance was emotionally depressed by her messy living room and was actively trying to run away to find a better home. Ma'am, it is programmed to map open spaces. It is not a tiny mechanical hostage plotting a desperate escape to freedom. 14. Picture walking up to a cash register absolutely devastated over a piece of printed cardboard. A woman brought back an ornate wooden picture frame, and she was practically in tears. Her grievance had absolutely nothing to do with scratched glass or chipped wood. She was entirely heartbroken because the smiling, picture-perfect family from the stock insert didn't come home with her. She honestly believed purchasing the frame meant acquiring the actual people in the photograph as her new, loyal companions. Discovering that a $12 price tag doesn't include lifelong friendship is a tough, brutal pill to swallow for anyone. 15. An arts and crafts project went horribly wrong for a very confused woman who brought back an entire pack of specialty origami paper. She practically threw the shredded, crumpled mess onto the counter. She was violently angry because the premium-colored paper kept getting permanent creases every single time she tried to fold it. She fully expected to construct complex, multi-layered paper cranes that somehow remained completely pristine, smooth, and entirely unbent. She essentially marched into a craft store, demanding the physical ability to fold a piece of paper without actually folding it. The sheer impossibility of that complaint alone deserves some kind of special award for defying the basic laws of physics. 16. Pet owners can be very protective, but this lady took it to an entirely new level of ridiculousness. She hauled a massive luxury orthopedic dog bed back to a pet superstore with a bizarre grievance. She claimed the product was defective because her house cat kept sleeping right in the middle of it. She was not mad at her feline, she was furious at the inanimate cushion. She aggressively argued that the fleece fabric should have been engineered to be dog-exclusive and automatically repel any unauthorized feline intruders. Look, unless that memory foam mattress comes equipped with a tiny armed security guard, you really just need to have a serious boundary conversation with your own cat. 17. The legends of oblivious tech support customers are absolutely real, and this guy is the king of them all. A furious computer owner demanded a full replacement for his expensive desktop tower because the built-in mechanical cup holder suddenly snapped off. The bewildered technician inspected the tragic wreckage and quickly realized this absolute genius was pressing a button to eject the fragile CD-ROM drive tray, and then using that thin piece of motorized plastic to hold a massive 44-ounce soda cup. What on earth was he thinking? That thin strip of plastic is not a luxury beverage feature for your gaming setup, buddy. That is an expensive electronic tragedy just waiting to ruin your motherboard. 18. A highly superstitious woman walked into a toy store carrying a standard Magic 8-ball, like it was a ticking radioactive bomb. She demanded a refund, claiming the novelty item was actively cursing her entire bloodline. Apparently, every single time she asked the plastic sphere a highly consequential question about her financial future, it fed her the bleak outlook not-so-good response. She became deeply convinced that the 20-sided blue die floating inside the dark liquid held a personal, sinister bias against her family's happiness. Ma'am, you are picking a serious, lifelong beef with a cheap piece of molded plastic filled with dyed antifreeze. The dark spirits are not haunting your game room. 19. Retail workers definitely see the absolute worst of humanity, but this specific return crosses the line into a biohazard. A totally unashamed customer proudly marched into a hardware store carrying a wet, heavily used toilet plunger inside a plastic grocery bag. His rock-solid reason for wanting a full refund? He had successfully unclogged his bathroom pipes and simply didn't need the tool anymore. He essentially treated the retail establishment like a free rental service for his disgusting plumbing emergencies. When the cashier flat-out refused to touch the contaminated rubber, the guy was genuinely offended. Sir, absolutely nobody wants your secondhand bathroom equipment. 20. Certain people treat a retail warranty not as a guarantee of quality, but as a personal challenge to destroy things. A very confident homeowner brought in a mangled garden hose that he had completely shredded to pieces by running over it with his own heavy-duty lawnmower. He pointed to the packaging that clearly stated lifetime warranty. His rock-solid legal argument was that since his own human heart was still beating and he was currently breathing air, his personal lifetime was still active. Therefore, the store owed him a new hose. He genuinely believed the corporate policy provided blanket coverage for his own reckless landscaping habits. Sir, your life may be continuing, but that green rubber tube is completely dead. Let it go. 21. Anger management issues really shine brightest at the customer service desk. An aggressive office worker brought in a novelty stress ball that had literally exploded into a million tiny foam crumbles, currently contained inside a Ziploc bag. Without an ounce of shame, she loudly admitted that during a highly contentious 3-hour corporate conference call, she squeezed the toy with such absolute murderous intent that it violently detonated right in her hands. She blamed the cheap manufacturing for not handling her unhinged, white-hot workplace rage. Lady, if your grip strength is completely crushing solid polyurethane into fine dust, you need intense therapy, not a $3 refund. 22. Teenage angst is a very real phenomenon, but this specific situation reaches a spectacular new level of dramatic nonsense. A high school girl returned a cheap novelty mood ring because the center stone stubbornly refused to turn purple. She passionately explained to the clerk that she had been feeling deeply mysterious and intensely romantic for an entire week, yet the jewelry remained a dull, boring blue. She felt incredibly disrespected, claiming the cheap metal band was actively gaslighting her emotions and denying her spiritual validation. Honey, that ring is filled with thermochromic liquid crystals that react exclusively to the sweat and temperature of your finger. It is not reading your secret diary entries to validate your teen drama. 23. Talk about having serious trouble letting go of the past. A disgruntled woman walked into a bridal boutique dragging a heavy garment bag that contained her custom-tailored wedding dress. The kicker here? Her actual wedding happened 5 entire years ago, and she was still happily married. She just felt incredibly angry that the expensive lace garment no longer possessed the magical, butterflies-in-the-stomach aura she vividly remembered from her special day. She literally sniffed the aging fabric and declared the spark was completely gone, treating the dress exactly like a dead battery. The textile weaving didn't change, lady. The harsh reality of long-term domestic life just finally set in. 24. Mother Nature is apparently moving way too slowly for modern consumer attention spans. A disgruntled guy hauled a potted Venus flytrap back to a local garden center, loudly complaining that the botanical organism simply didn't eat houseflies fast enough to satisfy him. He had apparently pulled up a lawn chair and stared at the greenery for hours, fully expecting a violent, high-speed Hollywood action movie, but ended up watching a slow-motion vegetable instead. He aggressively accused the tiny green plant of being incredibly lazy and demanded a predator with a much stronger work ethic. It is a rooted plant, buddy, not a professional exterminator on a corporate payroll. 25. A woman angrily dragged a heavy cardboard box of high-end solar-powered garden lights up to a hardware store counter, loudly complaining that they never once turned on. When the bewildered employee opened the packaging, he found every single light absolutely caked in thick, wet mud. The customer proudly explained that she had purposefully buried the solar charging panels deep underground because the dark plastic squares looked incredibly ugly and completely ruined the carefully curated aesthetic of her flower beds. She essentially blindfolded the energy source from the actual sun, and then had the sheer audacity to get furious at the dark. That is a level of landscape design stupidity that simply cannot be fixed with a store credit. 26. Just try to mentally picture this ridiculous scene. A grown man is standing right in the middle of a pet store aisle, aggressively blowing into a metal dog whistle until his face turns bright purple, while screaming at the top of his lungs that he cannot hear a single thing. He furiously demanded his cash back for purchasing a defective, entirely silent product. When the exhausted clerk calmly explained that the ultrasonic frequency is specifically engineered so that only canines can detect it, the man fiercely accused the manufacturer of actively discriminating against human ears. Seriously? Buddy, unless you currently possess a wagging tail, a serious flea problem, and a desire to chase mail trucks, you are simply not the target demographic for this item. 27. A highly agitated homeowner returned a hollowed-out hiding rock. You know, those fake plastic stones designed to inconspicuously conceal a spare house key in your front yard. Her major complaint was that the item actually looked entirely too much like a real rock. She furiously argued that she completely lost the thing in her own garden because the molded plastic blended in entirely too well with the actual gravel and dirt. She somehow wanted the manufacturer to design a fake stone that looked incredibly obvious for her to spot, but still hyper-realistic enough to completely fool any passing neighborhood burglars. She essentially wanted a glowing neon sign, pointing to her house keys that only her specific retinas were allowed to see. 28. A man triumphantly walked into an office supply store to return a single black permanent marker, demanding a full refund based on absolute principle. He proudly declared that he had successfully scrubbed the black ink completely off his wooden workbench by utilizing industrial-grade chemical acetone and a heavy sheet of coarse sandpaper. He smugly argued that if the ink can be physically eradicated with highly toxic chemicals and brutal friction, it clearly is not legally permanent. He felt deeply betrayed that the little plastic pen had made a massive promise it simply could not keep. Are you kidding me? Sir, with enough chemicals and lasers, even permanent facial tattoos can be removed. Calm down and keep your dollar. 29. Looking exactly like a freshly boiled Maine lobster, a furious vacationer stormed into a beachside pharmacy demanding a full cash refund for a bottle of SPF 50 sunscreen because she claimed the liquid was completely broken. She admitted to the clerk that she applied a thin layer exactly once at dawn, proceeded to aggressively tread water in the salty ocean for 6 uninterrupted hours, and then felt personally victimized when she got severely burned. She genuinely believed the plastic squeeze bottle possessed some sort of telepathic psychic link that would magically reapply the protective barrier while she was submerged in the Atlantic. I hate to break it to you, ma'am, but the laws of chemical science really do not care about your beach day feelings. 30. Time management is undeniably a difficult skill to master, but basic personal hygiene really should not be this complicated. A terribly confused man returned a half-used stick of antiperspirant deodorant that clearly advertised 24-hour protection on the label. His grievance was that he suddenly started smelling absolutely terrible right at the 25th hour of his day. He had purposely refused to reapply the wax. He legitimately, firmly believed that the cosmetic product possessed a tiny internal digital timer that mathematically expired exactly 1 hour past a full planetary rotation. He felt completely cheated by the corporate greed that refused to provide him with any free overtime odor coverage. Please, for the sake of humanity, just take a shower. 31. A perfectly healthy older gentleman casually walked into a monument workshop and tried to return a massive, custom-engraved, incredibly heavy granite tombstone. His shocking reasoning? He simply did not die on his scheduled timeline. He had proactively pre-ordered the heavy death rock while battling a severe illness, ended up making an absolute miracle recovery, and then decided that storing his own name and birth date on a massive grave marker in his dusty garage was bringing incredibly bad luck to his household. He actually demanded store credit for the heavy slab. Honestly, what exactly do you even purchase with a store credit at a place that exclusively carves gravestones? Do you just pick up a decorative birdbath and call it even? 32. You would think basic elementary school biology is universally understood, but some modern consumers prove otherwise. An entire family showed up at an animal shelter trying to return their incredibly happy 1-year-old golden retriever. Their rock-solid reasoning? The animal simply got way too big for their living room furniture. They stood there with straight faces and argued the shelter had maliciously sold them a defective miniature dog. When the bewildered veterinary staff tried to gently explain that all living, breathing mammals consume food and physically grow larger over time, the father stared blankly at them like they were speaking an ancient alien language. 33. Blaming your own terrible weekend decisions on a local grocery store is a remarkably bold strategy. A woman slammed an entirely empty bottle of cheap Chardonnay on the customer service desk, and she was completely furious. She wasn't complaining about the vintage or a bad cork. She actively demanded financial compensation because drinking the entire thing by herself on a Tuesday night gave her a massive splitting headache the next morning. She actually believed the store had knowingly sold her defective, highly toxic grape juice. Ma'am, you didn't buy a bad batch, you bought a one-way ticket to a standard hangover. Take some aspirin and leave the poor cashier alone. 34. A terribly annoyed man marched into a home improvement store to return a digital carbon monoxide detector because it was relentlessly making a loud, piercing beeping noise that was giving him a massive headache. The poor retail employee just stared at him with wide, terrified eyes. The completely oblivious customer then casually admitted he actually took the internal batteries out just to make the shrieking stop so he could finally get a good night of sleep. He was literally, physically returning the exact electronic device that was desperately screaming at the top of its digital lungs to save his mortal life, all because he found the alarm tone slightly annoying. Sir, do not stop at the refund desk. You need to drive immediately to the nearest hospital emergency room. 35. Sometimes a refund request is just a massive, flashing neon sign that someone desperately needs a long vacation. An exhausted-looking man brought back a heavy set of expensive blackout curtains, his hands physically shaking with deep frustration. He didn't care that morning sunlight was peeking through the edges. Instead, he was blindingly furious that he could still audibly hear the outside world moving around his house. He aggressively argued that the term blackout legally mandated a total sensory void, perfectly simulating a floating isolation tank. He didn't want a dark master bedroom. He legitimately wanted to completely cease existing in the physical realm for 8 hours a night. 36. A highly disappointed man slammed a printed DNA ancestry kit result packet onto a pharmacy counter, looking absolutely, soul-crushingly devastated by his own genetic makeup. He loudly demanded a complete refund because the expensive laboratory test cruelly revealed that his bloodline was basically 100% traced back to farmers in Ohio, completely destroying his lifelong fantasy that he was a direct descendant of fearsome Scandinavian Vikings or medieval European royalty. He genuinely pointed his finger at the cashier and accused the scientific testing facility of actively suppressing his inner, historical warrior spirit just to bore him to death. Look, buddy, you simply cannot return your own boring cellular genetics. You just have to look in the mirror and live with them. 37. A shocking number of modern consumers firmly believe that basic office technology operates on actual, verifiable Hogwarts wizardry. A very confident customer hauled a massive, heavy wireless printer right back through the electronic store doors, entirely convinced the internal motors were permanently fried because it stubbornly stopped printing documents after 6 months of heavy use. When the exhausted tech support guy simply popped the hood and informed him the machine was completely out of black ink cartridges, the man let out an audible gasp of horror. He legitimately thought the plastic box somehow generated infinite dark liquid pigment directly out of thin, microscopic air particles. Welcome to the harsh reality of the real world. Buddy, printer ink is one of the most expensive liquids on planet Earth. 38. The printed instruction manual was incredibly clear, but this particular customer's thought process was operating in a completely different dimension. A deeply offended woman aggressively returned a high-tech outdoor motion sensor floodlight with the bizarre complaint that using the product was simply way too much physical labor. She was highly insulted that she actually had to move her physical body, wave her human arms, or casually stroll past the plastic sensor eye just to trigger the bright LED illumination. She passionately argued that a premium smart light should just inherently sense deep within its wires exactly when she desired visibility, without her ever having to lift a single muscle. She essentially wanted the hardware store to stock psychic telepathic light bulbs. 39. An older gentleman walked into a hobby shop carrying a massive amateur astronomy telescope, and he was visibly shaking and sweating. He did not utter a single complaint about the expensive glass lens quality, the tripod stability, or the focus dials. Instead, he shockingly complained that gazing into the deep night sky made his soul feel entirely too small and universally insignificant. He had apparently spent exactly 1 hour staring into the vast, endless, completely terrifying void of dark space, and immediately suffered a full-blown, heavy existential crisis right there on his freshly mowed suburban lawn. He essentially wanted his $300 back to compensate for the sudden, terrifying realization that he is just a meaningless speck of floating space dust in a cold, uncaring universe. We cannot refund spiritual epiphanies, sir. 40. You have to wonder how some people manage to survive adulthood. A furious customer stormed into a pharmacy to return a pair of basic, over-the-counter reading glasses. His complaint? He put them on, stared at a Spanish newspaper, and still couldn't understand a single word. He completely bypassed the concept of optical magnification and genuinely believed the cheap magnifying lenses possessed a built-in magical language translation feature for his brain. He violently accused the store clerk of selling him a defective, uneducated pair of spectacles. Sir, they magnify the ink on the page. They don't magically teach you a foreign language while you sit on the toilet. 41. A wildly aggressive, tinfoil hat-wearing conspiracy theorist stormed into an educational supply store holding a perfectly round plastic geographical globe and loudly demanded his money back immediately. He was absolutely seething with rage, claiming the family-owned store was maliciously pushing a highly classified spherical agenda onto the general public. and he could not believe they blatantly refused to sell an accurate flat Earth desktop model. He violently spun the round globe on its metal axis, aggressively pointing a finger to argue that ocean water simply cannot curve around a ball, and he loudly accused the terrified teenage cashier of distributing government-funded propaganda. Look, buddy, we just sell basic geographic maps for middle school classrooms. We do not curate insane late-night internet rabbit holes. 42. A deeply superstitious diner rushed right back up to a Chinese restaurant takeout counter, holding a completely crumbled, uneaten fortune cookie, because the tiny typed slip of paper was missing from the center. He did not simply want a quick replacement dessert. The man was completely, visibly terrified for his own mortal life. He rapidly argued that opening an entirely empty cookie was a massive cosmic sign indicating that he literally had no future left on this earth. He aggressively demanded the bewildered restaurant manager immediately provide him with a powerful, positive prophecy to quickly reverse the terrible, looming ancient curse. I wish this was a joke, but a grown adult was physically shaking with pure, unadulterated fear over a highly common factory-made pastry error. 43. A fully grown, seemingly rational adult man furiously stormed into an office supply store, violently waving a standard roll of transparent Scotch tape in the air. He was absolutely screaming at the top of his lungs because his fingernails could not locate the sticky end of the strip. He fiercely argued that the manufactured product was entirely too invisible to be practically useful, and he loudly accused the major retail chain of purposely selling him a completely solid, useless plastic donut just to deeply mock his intelligence. His face was bright beet red, and his hands were physically shaking with intense rage over an incredibly basic desk accessory. Imagine letting a 70-cent piece of sticky cellophane push you completely over the mental edge. 44. Delusions of grandeur hit incredibly hard in the health and beauty aisle. An aggressively angry woman returned a half-empty plastic bottle of expensive volumizing shampoo, loudly complaining that her wet hair didn't look exactly like the glowing celebrity featured in the television commercial. She felt deeply, personally swindled because stepping out of her tiny suburban shower didn't instantly transform her into an international supermodel with a highly paid, personal wind machine aggressively blowing her locks around. That specific visual phenomenon is called a multi-million-dollar marketing budget, ma'am. It is not a magical, reality-altering potion brewed inside a plastic squeeze bottle. 45. A highly distressed customer returned a beautiful, decorative woven dream catcher to a gift shop, and she had a look of absolute, genuine paranormal horror entirely consuming her eyes. She loudly claimed the handmade item was horribly defective because it had actually worked way too well, catching entirely too many terrifying nightmares, and now her master bedroom felt physically heavy with completely trapped evil spirits. She vehemently refused to physically touch the string webbing, treating the craft fair purchase exactly like it was a highly unstable, loaded nuclear weapon entirely filled to the brim with dark magic. She aggressively demanded the terrified retail clerk immediately dispose of the heavily cursed object. That is an awful lot of intense spiritual pressure to put on some glued feathers and cheap twine. 46. Following directions is generally a great trait, but basic survival instincts should probably kick in at some point behind the wheel. A furious driver returned an expensive dashboard GPS unit that was completely dripping wet and covered in slimy lake algae. Why? Because the tiny digital map confidently guided his sedan directly into a massive, deep body of water. Rather than looking out of his own massive glass windshield, he simply chose to blindly obey the synthesized robot voice, exactly like a brainwashed cult member. He loudly argued the satellite machine should have definitely known deep water isn't a paved county highway. Sir, your human eyeballs are the primary navigation system. 47. The audacity of the holiday season truly brings out the absolute worst in retail consumers. A highly aggressive father slammed a completely thawed, raw 20-pound turkey onto the grocery store return counter the day after Thanksgiving. He demanded a full cash refund simply because the massive bird was physically too large to fit inside his tiny apartment oven, forcing his hungry family to eat fast food instead. He completely ignored the fact that he was the one who bought it without measuring. He treated the grocery store like a rental agency for giant poultry he completely failed to cook. Take your salmonella and leave. 48. An entirely devastated man returned a heavy high-end office paper shredder while tragically clutching a massive clear plastic bag entirely filled with tiny useless paper confetti that previously used to be his highly important original tax return documents. He was unbelievably angry that the expensive desktop machine simply did its assigned job entirely too well. He had accidentally fed the absolute wrong, highly sensitive legal document into the metal teeth, and he furiously blamed the steel shredder for not magically possessing a digital computerized pop-up window, loudly asking, "Are you absolutely sure you want to destroy this?" Sir, it is a mindless spinning cylinder of sharp metal blades waiting for paper. It is not your personal, highly educated, certified financial advisor. 49. A wildly hostile woman violently stormed into a quiet local bookstore, aggressively slamming a famous self-help paperback book titled How to Win Friends and Influence People Directly onto the wooden checkout desk. She furiously screamed directly into the terrified teenage cashier's face, loudly proclaiming, "This absolute garbage does not work at all." I read 3 entire chapters last night and I still absolutely hate every single person on Earth. She completely, entirely failed to grasp the massive, glowing irony that aggressively screaming at a minimum wage service worker is the exact precise reason why she currently has absolutely zero friends. Ma'am, the printed ink pages are supposed to act as a gentle social guide. It is not a magical personality, altering spell cast from a wand. 50. Sometimes the sheer weight of consumer disappointment is completely palpable in the air. A highly optimistic guy purchased a cheap $2 new car scent cardboard air freshener to hang on the mirror of his absolutely destroyed, incredibly rusted out 1998 Honda Civic. He aggressively returned the little cardboard pine tree exactly a week later, not because the artificial pine scent was bad, but strictly because his horrific, decaying vehicle still aggressively drove like an absolute piece of rolling junk. He seemingly, honestly believed that the tiny piece of scented cardboard would magically, chemically overhaul his entirely blown transmission and immediately repair his absolutely destroyed squeaking suspension system. It is a highly scented piece of paper, buddy, not a professional, certified master mechanic trapped inside a tiny plastic bag. Be honest, have you ever stood in line behind someone this hopelessly confused? Head to the comments and expose the absolute worst retail meltdown you've personally witnessed. I read everything. If you enjoyed watching society's collective IQ drop in real time, aggressively hit the like button and subscribe to the channel right now. It's totally free, no receipt required.